Academica Media. From Academica Media Studios in Miami, Florida, it's Big Ideas in Education, a weekly recap of inspiration and innovation in your schools.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Big Ideas in Education. I am your host, Dr. Sarah Boulos-Fye of Somerset Academy Schools, joined as always by my co-host, Ryan Kairalla of Doral College. Hi, Ryan.
Hi, Sarah. Great to be chatting with you.
Great to be with you. What do you want to talk about today?
Well, I got a story here for you, Sarah, from the 74. Out of Virginia, Democratic lawmakers are seeking to ban public colleges and universities in the states from providing admissions preference to legacies, or students who are related to alumni or donors of the institution. The legislative push in the state is mirroring similar activity in other states and has come following the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling back in June that declared that race-conscious admissions policies at public and private colleges was unconstitutional. In support of the measure, Virginia State Senator Schuyler Van Valkenburg said, quote, "Teaching in a classroom every day, I see how hard these kids try to get into colleges, how much they stress over getting into colleges, and having all these things come together. The Supreme Court case, knowing that Virginia has a higher percentage of its universities use legacy admissions, and kind of seeing the role it plays in day-to-day in my day job, it was kind of a no-brainer for me to put this bill in to try to make the process a little bit more merit-based." Since 2015, more than 100 colleges and universities have ended legacy admissions preferences, but close to 800 still use the practice as of 2020. A similar legislative push is happening at the federal level, with Democratic Senator Tim Kaine and Republican Senator Todd Young proposing the Merit Act, which would prevent accredited colleges and universities from giving admissions preferences based on the applicant's relationship to alumni or donors. Now, as we talked about in the article, Sarah, a lot of this push lately has come following this recent Supreme Court ruling in Students for Fair Admissions v. Harvard, which overturned a great deal of 14th Amendment precedent by saying that private and public colleges alike can no longer use race as a factor in college admissions. And so in response, a lot of legislators said, well, if we're going to make admissions truly, quote unquote, merit-based, then we also need to remove admissions preferences for these legacies, these relatives of donors and alums, and make it a truly, quote, merit-based admissions process. And it's there's a lot of considerations back and forth here, and we can talk about some of the arguments in both directions. But this is something that sort of hits home for the students that we work with, Sarah, because college admissions are always on their mind from a very young age.
Yeah, and so I don't spend a ton of time working with students who are already in college and understanding the admissions process. So I guess I'm wondering, it's my understanding that many colleges kind of have, I guess for lack of a better term, quotas to support admission for underprivileged or underserved communities. And that might include first-time college goers, right? So if you are on the other end of that, someone who has, maybe you're the first in your family to go to college, that would be kind of a preferential admissions process. Is that correct?
A lot of, it's going to vary from institution to institution, but yeah, a lot of the colleges might, maybe not as an explicit quota, but they may give preferences to students from underprivileged backgrounds, simply because they know that these are students that maybe didn't have as many of the same advantages as students from more affluent backgrounds. And so they are trying to ensure a more level playing field in the admissions process. You'll take those backgrounds into account. And by the way, even the Supreme Court in the Students for Fair Admissions case has said that kind of admissions preference is still constitutional. You are allowed to look at a student's socioeconomic background when evaluating the whole applicant. And so, those kind of preferences still, at least according to current legal precedent, still pass constitutional muster, as would legacy admissions, right? So far, there hasn't been any constitutional case in which anybody has said that legacy admissions would violate the 14th Amendment. It's just a race-based admissions, which has not met the Supreme Court standard under the 14th Amendment recently.
Okay, there's a lot of legal speak in that.
Sorry.
As a layperson, I'm trying to understand that, because I guess in my mind, it makes sense that if Well, first thing that caught my attention when you were saying that is that this obviously, it sounds like only public schools in this area or public universities are considering this change.
Well, that's not fully true either.
Okay.
Certainly, public universities are going to be more at the forefront with this because those are the institutions that are directly controlled by the state governments. But we are seeing legislative push, including at the U.S. Congress level, to have these anti-legacy laws apply to all institutions. So what's happening is the federal government and these members of Congress who are sponsoring this legislation are using the Higher Education Act, which regulates institutional accreditation and says, if you are an accredited institution, you would be required under the Merit Act being proposed by Senator Kane and Young to end legacy admissions at your institution, be you a public institution or a private institution.
So I wonder, and again, this is me asking for others who may not understand, when we talk about legacy admissions, does it mean that essentially if a parent or donor or some person that you are related to attended this university, you are guaranteed a spot in that university? Or is it kind of, okay, we have all these boxes, and if you meet all these requirements, you and a person who has no relationship to the university, all things being equal, this is one extra tick in the box for you?
Generally, the way you're going to see legacy admissions take shape is it's a plus factor, right?
Okay.
It's not going to be, if a student, at least in theory, if a student is wholly unqualified, the mere fact that they are the child of a alum is not going to get them admitted. But then again, that's probably a sliding scale, right? You can imagine at some institutions, if you are the child of an extraordinarily wealthy donor, somebody who's donating tens of millions of dollars to the university, you could probably get into that school even if your academics are significantly under the standard.
And see, that sounds messy to me because that harkens back to like the college admissions scandal that happened a couple years ago when we were talking about how people were donating and doing all of these superfluous things to get their kids into certain schools.
Oh yeah, no, it's interesting with that college admissions scandal, right? Because in a lot of ways, the crime that a lot of those Hollywood celebrities got in trouble with, it isn't that they paid money to get their kids into colleges, because parents have been paying money to get their kids into college for generations.
Yes.
Really, their crime was that they didn't pay enough, right? Because if they had paid, millions of dollars to the university directly, they would have gotten their kid into that university, and that would have been completely legal. What they tried to do was pay slightly less than millions of dollars to some admissions consultant who unfairly gamed the system to get their kids into the university. And if you're seeing some measure of hypocrisy with that, I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
Now, I do think there is some merit to the university's argument because there are plenty of, the vast majority of universities still employ some amount of legacy admissions. And if you were to ask them to defend these policies, they would say things like, it's good to have alumni engagement, right? A university is well served by having multiple generations of students attend that school and create these, family trees that are deep into that university, creating that strong relationship. Me and all my brothers and a lot of my uncles and aunts all went to the University of Miami, and that's a great point of pride for us. And they'll also say, hey, it's about the endowment. If admitting a student into a college means that university is going to get a lot of extra funding, which they can use, by the way, to potentially fund scholarships for underprivileged students, that might be something that can help underprivileged students a lot more than it hurts them. There's a lot of nuance to this, and I think there is a defensible position for the universities to have, but I can't discount the fact that in the light of cases like this recent Supreme Court case, which did take direct aim at race-based admissions, there's going to be intense scrutiny for other kinds of non-merit-based admissions, including legacies.
Right. And so what other considerations do you think potentially could be on the chopping block?
Like in addition to, what other things could there
Legacy
be?
status. Yeah. So when we're talking about merit-based, we're talking about things that most people have probably considered with, college admissions, GPA, SAT or
Mhm.
ACT scores. Excuse me. Class rank, a lot of quantifiable metrics. But it sounds like a lot of universities and are also considering outside factors that maybe the public is not always aware of.
Well, I know that a lot of universities will, for example, look at a student's status as an athlete.
Oh,
Even
absolutely.
even if a student does, even if that particular university isn't going to give a student a scholarship as an athlete in a particular sport because it's a non-scholarship sport, they might give a preference to a student that has athletic skill simply because they want that student to play sports for that school, even if it's a non-scholarship sport. And yeah, and to your point, Sarah, that's where we kind of get into this gray area where on the one hand, that student is demonstrating some kind of ability that is directly valuable to the college. On the other hand, that's not the kind of skill that we might directly associate with being deserving of a seat in a college. GPA, test scores, co-curricular activities. It can get very, very hairy the more you dig into it.
Yeah, and I could see too that they might make an argument where that's just showing how well-rounded that student is, the same way that if, they were on the debate club or something like that on the debate team would give them a more well-rounded applicant. And again, I could see how that opens up a lot of debate because athletics and academics do have lots of positive correlations.
Yep. And and again, if we get back to the defense that colleges and universities have for legacy programs, right? It benefits the campus through additional donations, through deeper family relationships within institutions. Like the whole institution is better off from legacy admissions. I mean, these were the same arguments that colleges were making with race-based admissions. The arguments that we're making was by bringing in a more diverse student body onto a campus, it enriched classroom discussions, it made the campus more worldly and cosmopolitan. And so there's always an argument beyond the numbers, beyond the GPA and test scores about why some of these unique admissions policies are employed. And, some of these things pass legal scrutiny and some of them just don't.
And so I think this is possibly me requesting another episode just to understand that Supreme Court decision because I don't know that I fully do. So put a pin in that because I'm sure I want to tap your legal mind to understand that. I think that
I
could
would
have been a
love to
good
do a whole
preview.
episode on that opinion. This area of
Really
doctrine is really interesting.
need to break that down further.
Yeah, that recent opinion in June changed a great deal of precedent in this field. Before this opinion came along, there was decades of precedent by the Supreme Court, which
Right.
basically allowed some amount of race-based admissions preferences by universities. And then this case, Students for Fair Admissions v. Harvard, completely changed it, not just at the public university level, but with private universities
I heard you
as
say
well.
private as well. And so again, as a layperson trying to understand this, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense why something is legal and has precedent for so many decades and then just one day, boom, it doesn't. So yes, I think in fairness, I do think that would make a good topic to understand from your perspective.
Absolutely. All right. Well, but I'm not the only one with a great topic this week, Sarah.
Well, yeah, I mean, I want to talk about my topic too, but I know that you could go on for probably 2 more hours, which is fantastic. And I want to encourage that. But for the sake of this episode, I'm going to transition because I was considering how we're going to publish this episode in the first week of February. I was looking at several resources to prepare, to share some resources for Black History Month. And I was looking at the ASALH, the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, which was established in 1915 as an extension of the founding of Black History Month, which if I'm being completely honest, I probably had used their resources before and did not remember that. But they are currently offering a virtual Black History Month festival, highlighting the theme of African Americans and the arts. Some of the incredible virtual exhibits include the Black presence in sci-fi, anime, and comics, and the impact of the arts in the Gullah Geechee community. So, there is literally something for everyone. It's a lot. It's really
They're really
incredible.
running the gamut. This is cool.
Yeah, I was really interested in that. And of course, showing perspectives that maybe are often underrepresented, especially in the arts community. So, looking through these offerings was inspiring to me to look deeper into some of the local resources that exist where I live. If you don't know, the Gullah Geechee community is actually a community within South Carolina, which has a very rich tradition. And that's kind of, if you could be in my brain, it would make sense that looking at something in South Carolina would make me think what's going on in South Florida. But, the connection was there. And I don't know, I'm going to throw a little bit of I don't know if this is a millennial reference or not, but I don't know if you remember, there was like a Nick Jr. TV show when I was a kid called Gullah Gullah Island. I don't know if you remember that.
Of course I
Right?
remember Gullah Gullah
I
Island.
remember Gullah Gullah Island, watching that as a kid and not really understanding that was not just a family and an island. I thought it was just some place. I didn't really think about it at the time as it being a really rich African-American cultural touchstone in our country. But the culture of the Gullah Geechee community and all of this is really its own thing, and something that is really impactful to us as Americans. And I'll be honest, my own ignorance of that was that I had a connection to it. It was something I had seen and experienced, but not really recognized as something that had widespread cultural impact that is very much a part of African-American community and African-American, therefore American history. So that kind of was my thread that connected. What else am I a part of or seeing or witnessing that I don't even recognize is a critical part of Black history? So that's where it was. So I would encourage you all to do some Googling or some chat GPTing to see what resources exist in your own area or what components of Black history are existing in your space that maybe you might pass all the time and not be aware of. For example, looking up in South Florida, there's a tremendous resource, a tremendous wealth of resources, I should say, for Black history here in South Florida. Sharing important locations that are around us, such as historic Virginia Key Beach Park, which is here in Miami, was designated as a beach for African Americans during the segregation era. The contributions of Mary McLeod Bethune in Daytona Beach. There is the African American Museum of the Arts in DeLand and the Harry T. and Harriet V. Moore Memorial Park and Museum in Mims, which I did have to look up, is in Brevard County. Some of these locations might be places that you and your students see on a regular basis or drive by on a trip and may not realize the cultural impact that exists there. Maybe use this as an opportunity to invite African-American professionals, community leaders, or historians to share their experiences and knowledge with your students. These guest speakers can offer personal insights into their achievements and challenges faced in our own communities. And while there are endless websites and listicles dedicated to celebrating Black History Month itself, I think we need to remember that as educators, we have a responsibility to ensuring that our students are seeing themselves and their history in our curriculum year-round. So dedicating some time to reviewing our curriculum and asking, how often are our students exposed to authentic experiences that celebrate African-American contributions in what we teach every day? And I'm going to say, as I'll be honest, in our own failings, as an ELA teacher, I can tell you that it's way too easy to stick to what's decided at the beginning of the year and never think twice about it, because there's just so much thought and energy and effort that goes into preparing these resources. And I can also tell you, if we're being completely honest, February doesn't always feel like a good time to reflect because so many of us are just like on that bullet train towards testing and the end of the year. But maybe we take a moment and we, at the very least, put a day on our calendar. We can talk about maybe June or July with links from this episode, or bookmark this episode to listen to again when we're in that, headspace, to really take the time to not just reflect on what we want to do for Black History Month, but how can we include these authentic experiences all year long?
I love so much of what you brought there. Among the many things that you said that made me smile and, great advice all around was the thing that really spoke to me was the idea of kind of localizing Black History Month on your school campus, right? As you noted in your discussion there, a lot of what we are inclined to teach when Black History Month rolls around is kind of the standardized curriculum that is brought to us, often that has a national flair to it, talking about some of the major figures in Black history and in the civil rights movement. But what I think your example teaches us as well is there's something to be said for looking for the Black history in your own community. Everywhere in the United States is going to have some significant piece of Black history that you can share with your students to localize this phenomenon, to show them that Black history is not just something that happens far away in Washington, D.C. or in Selma, Alabama, but there's significant Black history right in everyone's backyard, and it's worth teaching. And the piece you also brought in about how about bringing in prominent Black professionals in your community to speak to the kids, particularly so that students of color can see themselves in the professionals in their own community. That seems like a really valuable tool.
And I think because we talk about Black History Month, we think of it as the past, and let's focus on the past. But I think that looking at the cultural and artistic achievements that are happening right now, I was really inspired on the website, the ASALH festival, that they highlighted not just the past, but the future, right? The present and the future. And looking at anime and sci-fi and comics, like I was also thinking about how we as educators can take what our students are interested in and challenge them to look for prominent Black leaders in those areas, right? So thinking back to when, I was a kid and I really liked Gullah Gullah Island or something silly, and not just realizing, hey, do you guys know that this is not just a TV show? It's not just a cute show, but this is a whole community. This is a real island, and that there are people there and what this does. So just trying to imagine how we can take what our students are already interested in and help them connect those threads, I think is really helpful.
And by the way, I was today years old when I just found out that Gullah Gullah Island was based on, a real place in a real community.
Yep.
So thank you for that. That
I don't think the puppets are really there, but
Yeah.
the people are.
Binya Binya wasn't real, is what you're telling me?
Well, I mean, maybe once upon a time. I don't know. It's a lot to unpack there. That's a whole other episode. Well, we'd love to hear from you on what you have connected with in this episode, or if you want to share some additional resources or thoughts. Feel free to reach out to us using the hashtag Big Ideas in Education. We hope you have a great week, and we can't wait to talk to you next time.
The views expressed on the preceding program have been those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of Academica, its clients, staff, affiliates, or advertisers.